close your eyes. And let's drift back to the strange and slippery world of perception, where reality isn't what it seems and never quite agrees to hold still. You're sitting in a quiet classroom, sunlight spilling across the floor. The teacher points at a diagram on the board, and everyone nods as if they see the same thing. But they don't. You don't. You're all staring through invisible filters, trained by habit, emotion, and the tiniest cues. You've probably never heard about this, but your attention can be hijacked, redirected, and rebuilt without you ever noticing the theft. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You drift into the idea that perception is less like a window and more like a spotlight, small, selective, and easily steered. The trick? You guide it. You learn to control what others see by deciding what they don't. The human brain, despite all its glorious upgrades, is lazy in the most elegant way. It fills in missing details, assumes patterns, and edits reality like an overworked film intern. Scientists still argue whether this tendency evolved to conserve energy or to help us survive by ignoring irrelevant data. Either way, it means that if you shine your mental flashlight in the right place, you can turn the entire scene. You start with focus, not your own, but theirs. A gesture, a word, even a pause can act like a magnet for attention. Magicians know this instinctively. They'll snap their fingers with one hand while palming the coin with the other. You might do it too, without realizing, distracting someone with a sudden, "Oh, look at that," while you quietly nudge the conversation toward your point. The real illusion isn't the magic, it's the perception shift. Here's the first forbidden trick. When you want someone to see your point, don't argue it, frame it. You guide their senses, not their logic. Show them what you want them to notice, and their brain does the rest. This is why advertising flashes a product beside a celebrity, why politicians stand in front of flags, and why your friend posts that effortless selfie after 47 retakes. Each image whispers, "This is what matters. This is what's true." Think about that classic optical illusion, the one where you see either a young woman or an old hag. Both exist, but your eyes choose one. Your brain edits the world faster than your conscious mind can blink. One quirky tidbit. Neuroscientists once found that your brain's visual cortex starts processing what you'll see before you even finish moving your eyes. In other words, you decide what to notice before you've even noticed it. Now imagine using that to your advantage. You walk into a meeting and subtly place your coffee cup at the center of the table, not near you, right in the visual field of the decision maker. It becomes a silent anchor, drawing eyes toward you each time someone glances down, or you tilt your head slightly while speaking. The movement catches their gaze for a moment, and suddenly your words feel more vivid. Small moves, quiet outcomes. But this trick works both ways. You can also shift your own perception. When stress floods in, heart racing, thoughts tangled, you can deliberately redirect your focus. Notice one sound in the room, the fan, the clock, the subtle hum of night. Your mind follows your gaze. Calm follows awareness. It's like changing the lens of your inner camera. Scientists still argue whether mindfulness reprograms perception by strengthening the prefrontal cortex or simply by tiring out the brain's habitual noise. Either way, focusing differently changes reality. You can't see everything at once, but you can choose what to see. You remember that teacher, the one with the sunlit board? Imagine walking back into that room. Everyone's watching the diagram again, tracing the same lines. But you, Now, you look at the shadow under the chalk, the glint of light on the window, the rhythm of the dust drifting through air. The world tilts slightly. You've switched perception itself. A little joke before you drift deeper. If perception shapes reality, then maybe that's why you swear your phone only falls screen down. Reality isn't cruel. It's just cooperative with your expectations. Another? When someone says, keep an open mind, they usually mean, please adopt mine. And the third, whenever you lose your keys, they're not hiding. Your attention just went on strike. The first forbidden mind trick, then, is simple to describe and hard to master. To control what others see, you don't shout louder, you whisper softer. You guide attention, one small cue at a time. And somewhere between what's real and what's chosen, perception folds quietly around your will. You feel it now, the weight of awareness shifting, the spotlight narrowing. Somewhere out there, 1,000 unseen details fade to grey, while one glows brighter than before. And as that light moves, so does the story. But before we go any further, let me take a quick pause. If you enjoy videos like this, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. A simple like or a tap on the hype button really helps these ideas reach more people. And if you can, leave a comment below. I'd love to know where you're watching from. It's always nice to be reminded that this isn't just me talking into the void, but a real conversation reaching across the world. The silence weapon. How carefully timed pauses make others fill the void. Your lips part but no sound escapes. The air hums between you and them. 10 seconds of nothing, heavy enough to make their pulse race. That, right there, is your weapon. Silence. Not the awkward kind that begs to be broken, but the deliberate stillness that turns tension into truth. You don't need power when you can create absence. You've probably felt it before. That moment in a conversation when someone stops mid-sentence and suddenly your brain scrambles to fill the gap. Psychologists call it the completion reflex. When the pattern breaks, the mind rushes to finish it, often revealing more than intended. Scientists still argue whether this reflex evolved for social bonding or simply because our brains hate uncertainty. Either way, silence is the nudge that makes people talk themselves into confession. Picture this. You're sitting across from someone who insists they're fine. You tilt your head slightly, give a slow, patient nod, and say nothing. 10 seconds later, their shoulders drop. Well, actually. And there it is. The truth doesn't tumble out in noise. It leaks out in quiet. The trick works because people mistake silence for judgment. In a world addicted to chatter, your calm becomes a mirror. They start projecting into it hopes, fears, excuses, just to escape the stillness. You don't interrupt, you collect. The air between words becomes a kind of net. Here's a mainstream fact to ground us. Research in negotiation shows that a pause of more than 3 seconds after an offer dramatically increases the chance that the other person will raise their bid. That's right. Just waiting earns you value. And here's a quirky tidbit. In Japan, long conversational silences are seen as signs of respect and thoughtfulness, not tension. The West calls it awkward, the East calls it mindful. Imagine how silence shapes a story. You're watching an interview, and the journalist asks a pointed question. The subject hesitates. The crowd leans in. The pause is louder than the answer ever could be. Silence rewires attention. It's negative space turned into spotlight. You start to experiment with it in your own world. Someone accuses you unfairly, and instead of defending yourself, You go still. You breathe, slow and shallow, eyes soft. Within seconds, their certainty cracks. They fill the silence with apologies. Or in a group, when everyone's talking over one another, you stop mid-thought. The quiet draws eyes toward you like gravity. The absence of noise feels like authority. Scientists still argue whether silence lowers cortisol or simply tricks the nervous system into slowing down. But studies hint that 2 minutes of quiet can reduce heart rate more effectively than soft music. That's your hidden advantage. Calm equals control. There's another layer to this forbidden trick, the timing of silence. You can use it before a key phrase to build weight, or after it to make it echo. Try saying, "I trust you," and then stopping. Let the sentence breathe. Suddenly, it's not just words. It's a spotlight of meaning. You can even play with micro-pauses in daily life. Between sips of coffee, between messages, between reactions. People will sense your patience and mistake it for power. You're not rushing to fill the air. You're giving it gravity. A little soft laugh escapes you. Funny, isn't it? The quietest people in meetings often get called mysterious, when they're really just buying time to let everyone else reveal themselves. Or how your teacher once said, "Think before you speak," and you thought they meant hesitate. They didn't. They meant strategize. And the third light joke: if silence were a weapon, introverts would be the Navy SEALs of communication. You start to realize that silence isn't the absence of voice. It's the amplifier of intention. In music, rest defines rhythm. In art, blank space defines form. And in persuasion, quiet defines control. When you pause, others fill in the blanks with their own truth, and they believe it came from themselves. So the next time you feel the urge to explain, to rush, to fill the moment, don't. Let the air hold it. Watch what happens. In that stillness, you aren't passive. You're powerful. The mind behind the quiet becomes the author of the moment. And just like that, you've learned your second forbidden trick, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. The room around you feels softer now. The fan hums. The edges of the world blur a little. Silence isn't empty. It's full of signals. You can feel them, like faint vibrations in the dark. And as your breath slows, you realize that sometimes the most commanding thing you can say is nothing at all. The invisible frame. How to secretly define what normal means. You've probably never noticed the invisible fences built around every conversation. The unspoken rules that decide what's normal, what's acceptable, what's off limits. They don't appear on cue cards or whiteboards, but you feel them every time someone says, "Well, that's just how it is." This trick isn't about arguing within a frame. It's about building it before anyone else realizes the walls exist. You walk into a room, and before a single word escapes your lips, the invisible frame is already forming. Maybe it's the way you carry your shoulders, relaxed but upright. Maybe it's the way you greet people, calm and measured, as if everything is unfolding exactly the way it should. Without knowing it, they start syncing to your rhythm. They step into your version of normal. That's the first secret. Whoever defines the baseline controls the game. Scientists still argue whether this instinct comes from social mimicry or the brain's need for belonging. But either way, it's powerful. Humans crave structure. The mind, like a polite guest, prefers to fit in. Here's a mainstream fact. In psychology, this phenomenon is called social framing. The brain compares incoming information not to objective truth, but to its surrounding context. You can literally change how something feels by changing what it's compared to. It's why a $5 coffee seems normal if it's next to a $7 one, and outrageous if it's next to a $1 cup. Reality bends to the frame you build around it. The invisible frame doesn't shout. It hums beneath the surface. You might, for instance, begin a conversation with, "Most people find this part easy, even if you know it's hard." That single phrase sets the expectation. The listener will strain to meet it, eager to be most people. Or when you say, "Let's assume this is the best option for now," you've already placed their focus inside your sandbox. A quirky tidbit. Art galleries know this trick better than anyone. A painting that looks average in a messy room suddenly feels priceless when it's centered under a spotlight, framed in gold and guarded by velvet ropes. Nothing about the art changed, only the context did. You try it out in your imagination, a dinner with friends. Someone complains about how stressful their job is. You lean back, take a slow sip of your drink, and say lightly, "That's funny. I've always thought stress was just the body's way of reminding us we're alive." Instantly, the tone shifts. What was a complaint becomes a reflection. You've reframed the meaning of discomfort itself. Scientists still argue whether framing works because of cognitive bias or emotional contagion. But one thing is certain. Once a frame is set, every detail inside it bends to match. That's why political debates sound like parallel universes. Each side fights over the facts, but the real battle is for the frame. Let's laugh softly for a moment. You know that friend who says, "I'm not being negative, I'm just being realistic." That's not realism. It's framing with mood lighting. Or when a store puts limited time offer on something they've been selling for 3 years. That's framing too, dressed in urgency's perfume. And my favorite, every time someone says, "I don't mean to brag," they're already bragging. But inside a frame that makes it sound humble. The beauty of this forbidden trick is how effortlessly it blends into daily life. The tone of your voice, the first sentence you say, even the order of your questions, all of it sets the mental weather for what follows. Want someone to trust your idea? Begin with calm certainty. Want them to question their own? Begin with gentle curiosity. The frame shifts before the logic ever arrives. Try it on yourself. When you call a challenge a test, you brace for pain. When you call it a lesson, you open to growth. The event doesn't change. The frame does. And perception obediently follows. As you breathe, you start to feel the edges of your own invisible frames. The ones you inherited from teachers, family, headlines, algorithms. You can almost sense the architecture of assumptions stretching around your thoughts like glass walls. And maybe, just maybe, the power isn't only in building new frames for others, but in noticing the ones built around you. The fan hums, the room stays dim, and your mind stretches a little wider, testing the boundaries. You're not breaking reality, you're rearranging it, one context at a time. And somewhere in that stillness, you realize the simplest truth of all. Whoever names the normal owns the narrative. The emotional mirror trap. How copying someone's energy, not their words, gives you instant control. Picture this. You're sitting across from someone whose mood clings to the air like static. Maybe they're irritated, maybe nervous, maybe quietly proud of something they won't admit. You start to feel it too, without trying. That's not empathy, it's mirroring. But tonight, you'll flip that current and learn to steer it instead of being swept along. Humans are emotional tuning forks. When one person vibrates at a frequency, anger, joy, anxiety, the people nearby begin to hum in the same key. It's not metaphor, it's neurology. Scientists still argue whether this stems from mirror neurons or older instinctive mimicry patterns. But either way, it's hardwired. You're a social chameleon with an internal ecosystem. A mainstream fact to ground us. Researchers once found that waiters who subtly mirrored their customers' tone and posture earned significantly higher tips. The body notices harmony before the mind does. A tilted head, a relaxed breath, the soft matching of pace. It all whispers, "I get you." And the moment someone feels understood, they open up like a flower tilting toward light. Now here's the forbidden twist. Instead of mirroring their energy, you deliberately project the emotion you want them to adopt, and they sink to you. It's emotional judo. You take the force coming at you, match it for a second, then redirect it. Someone's anxious. You begin with a matching tempo, slightly fast, voice light, but gradually slow your rhythm, drop your tone, exhale longer. Without realizing why, they start to calm. Their nervous system follows your lead. It's the same principle therapists use when de-escalating panic or coaches use to motivate athletes. You become the thermostat, not the thermometer. A quirky tidbit. In the 1990s, a team of psychologists tested how easily people caught moods by having actors walk through waiting rooms looking either grumpy or cheerful. Within minutes, the room's entire emotional climate changed, without a single word exchanged. Energy, it turns out, is contagious, and the quiet spreaders are the most effective ones. You test the trick in your mind. A friend rants about their boss, voice sharp as gravel. Instead of jumping in, you nod slowly, murmuring, "Yeah, that must have been rough." Then you breathe, deep and even, and they unconsciously mirror you. The rant softens. You've changed the current of the conversation without uttering a single persuasive argument. Scientists still argue whether mirroring triggers oxytocin or simply simulates belonging. But the outcome is clear. People trust those who reflect their emotional wavelength. They see themselves in you, and by extension, believe you understand them deeply, even if all you did was copy their rhythm for 30 seconds. A few soft smiles drift through your thoughts. Ever noticed how babies calm down when you sway, or how yawns spread through a group like a sleepy secret? That's mirroring in its purest form, connection by imitation. Or how couples who've been together for years start to share expressions, gestures, even phrasing. That's emotional choreography, evolving wordlessly. And the third light joke, if dogs are man's best friend, it's probably because they're professional emotional mirrors who get paid in snacks. The forbidden edge of this trick isn't cruelty, it's precision. You use it not to manipulate but to direct the temperature of human moments. Imagine standing in a tense meeting, voices sharp, chairs creaking. You lean back, fold your hands, exhale audibly. That one calm gesture ripples outward, nudging the collective heartbeat. In that instant, you've guided the room's emotion without touching a single fact. It's subtle power, the kind that hides behind kindness. The more you master it, the more invisible it becomes. When you match energy consciously, you realize how much of life is an emotional mirror hall, everyone reflecting everyone else, believing they're the source. You remember that whisper about perception from earlier, the spotlight trick. Now you understand it on a deeper level. Perception decides what people see. Mirroring decides how they feel. Control both, and the world quietly bends toward your gravity. The fan hums its constant lullaby, and your breath syncs with its rhythm. You can almost feel your heartbeat adjusting to the soft tempo of night, the room's air mirroring your calm. For a moment, the idea becomes physical. You are both the mirror and the light it reflects. And as you drift in that awareness, you realize the sweetest irony. Control doesn't always come from force. Sometimes it's just the gentlest reflection. The suggestion loop. How planting an idea subtly makes it feel like their own. You know that moment when someone swears they've had a brilliant idea, and you smile quietly because you know you whispered it to them days ago. That's the suggestion loop in action. The art of placing a seed so softly it grows roots in another mind and blossoms as their own thought. It's not hypnosis, not magic, just rhythm, patience, and timing. You begin by imagining the mind as a soft echo chamber. Ideas don't land all at once. They circle, bounce, and return. When you repeat a concept, not insistently, but rhythmically, it starts to feel familiar, and the brain, that lazy pattern seeker, mistakes familiarity for truth. Scientists still argue whether this effect, called the illusion of truth, evolved to help us filter chaos or simply to save cognitive effort. Either way, repetition becomes reality's twin, a mainstream fact. Advertisers rely on this every second. The more often you hear a jingle, a slogan, a logo, even passively, the more trustworthy it feels. Just do it. Think different. The phrases don't argue. They echo. That's the suggestion loop's power. It lets belief sneak in through the side door while logic's busy polishing the front knob. To use it, you start gently. You mention an idea in passing. You know, you might enjoy running in the mornings, nothing more. Then, days later, you circle back. Funny, I was reading that morning runs boost creativity. By the third or fourth mention, they're saying, you know, I've been thinking of starting morning runs. And you nod, knowing the loop has closed. A quirky tidbit. In 1957, a marketer claimed he boosted popcorn sales by flashing "Eat popcorn" subliminally during a movie. It turned out to be a hoax. But decades later, real studies showed that even subtle word exposure can nudge behavior if the person is already open to it. The trick isn't forcing, it's weaving. You practice it in daily life without realizing. That restaurant looks nice, you remark casually while scrolling. Maybe next week. Later, they've got that dish you like. By the third mention, your friend's the one suggesting it for dinner. The suggestion loop works because ownership strengthens conviction. We protect ideas we think are ours. Scientists still argue whether this effect stems from ego or efficiency. The brain tagging familiar thoughts as mine because it saves effort to trust itself. Either way, subtlety wins. The moment someone senses manipulation, the loop collapses. The secret is invisibility. You plant, wait, water, retreat. Here's how you build one intentionally. First, seed. Introduce a thought gently, without pressure. Second, echo. Let it reappear in new forms, stories, examples, jokes. Third, return. Revisit it later as if it's old news. By the end, the idea no longer feels external. It's self-born. Soft laugh now. Parents have been using this trick since time began. Maybe you'll feel better after cleaning your room, they say, and a week later, you're cleaning it, just because it feels right. Another, YouTube algorithms are essentially giant suggestion loops. They don't push, they nudge you again and again until it feels natural. And one more for fun. When someone says, "This was your idea," it's either a compliment or evidence that your loop worked too well. The suggestion loop also works inward. Tell yourself something once, it's a thought. Repeat it often, it's a belief. The mind can't resist its own echo. You start thinking of yourself as calm, lucky, focused, and the world bends slightly to match. Each quiet repetition tightens the loop until you no longer question it. You remember the emotional mirror from before, the way feelings reflect and spread. The suggestion loop is its cognitive cousin. Where mirroring steers mood, looping shapes memory. Together, they turn words into influence without ever raising your voice. Picture this now. You're in conversation. Your tone slow and steady. You drop a tiny idea, a seed disguised as small talk. Hours later, days later, it returns, echoed back by someone else as gospel. You don't correct them. You just smile softly and let the loop close in silence. Scientists still argue whether language rewires thought or merely reveals it. But in this dim quiet, you already know. Words are seeds, repetition is rain, and time is sunlight. The forest grows while nobody's watching. You stretch, feeling your own thoughts looping softly back to you, familiar and comforting. The fan hums its rhythm like a heartbeat, a perfect metronome for subtle persuasion. And as the air settles around you, you realize something delicious. In the right hands, silence and suggestion are twins. One plants the seed, the other lets it bloom. The authority illusion. How confidence, tone, and microsignals can make people obey without question. Imagine standing at a crosswalk. The light is red, but the person next to you strides forward, purposeful and unbothered. Within seconds, half the crowd follows. No words, no orders, just confidence. That's the authority illusion, when certainty itself becomes command. You don't need titles, uniforms, or badges to use it. You need presence. Humans are wired to read microsignals, posture, tone, gaze, for clues about who's in charge. The brain loves hierarchy. It saves energy. Scientists still argue whether this instinct traces back to survival in early tribes or simply to social conditioning. But either way, it's ancient. When someone radiates direction, others fall into orbit. A mainstream fact. In a 1960s study, psychologist Stanley Milgram showed that ordinary people would perform shocking actions when instructed by someone who looked authoritative. A lab coat, a clipboard, and calm tone were enough to override conscience. Terrifying, yes, but also revealing. Power doesn't always come from strength. It often comes from the illusion of certainty. Now, imagine bending that illusion gently, ethically, in your daily life. You start by slowing down. Authority doesn't rush. It owns time. Your gestures shrink. Your words get fewer but sharper. You trade and maybe for silence and stillness. Each pause becomes a statement. One quirky tidbit. Airline pilots are trained to sound calm even when they're terrified. The steady rhythm in their voices prevents panic from spreading to passengers and crew. The voice becomes a stabilizer. That's what authority really is. A tone that tells the nervous system we're safe. Follow me. You test it quietly. Next meeting, you lower your volume slightly instead of raising it. Heads lean in. When you nod after making a point, others nod too. Mirror neurons fire. Consensus follows. You didn't demand attention, you invited it. Authority isn't loud, it's gravitational. The trick is microcalibration. Shoulders down, breathing slow, eyes steady. People don't consciously notice, but their instincts do. The moment you appear certain, they relax into your certainty. It's why confident liars often win debates, and why even a hesitant truth sounds doubtful if whispered apologetically. Scientists still argue whether confidence creates competence or merely mimics it. But in human perception, they're almost indistinguishable. You might smile here, thinking about that one coworker who always starts sentences with, "Here's what we'll do." You don't even remember electing them as leader. They just act like one. Or the friend who narrates directions in a calm monotone during chaos, and suddenly everyone obeys. Another soft laugh. Parents have mastered the authority illusion by age 30. "Because I said so" is their final thesis on influence. And of course, GPS voices prove the point. Say something with enough confidence, and people will literally drive into a lake. But here's the deeper side of the trick. Real authority is a two-way mirror. When you project calm control, others reflect trust, which then feeds your confidence in return. It's a loop, a feedback circuit of composure. The illusion becomes reality, which strengthens the illusion. You realize that confidence doesn't start from belief. It starts from behavior. The body teaches the brain. Straighten your spine, lift your gaze, speak slowly, and within minutes, your nervous system follows suit. You're not faking power, you're rehearsing it until it feels like home. Now, extend that into subtle influence. When you want someone to agree, don't over-explain. Make your statement, pause, and wait. The silence acts as invisible punctuation, a space for them to fill with assent. If you keep talking, you chase their attention. If you stop, they chase yours. And here's a curious, slightly cheeky observation. In any group, the one who seems least desperate to be believed ends up being the most persuasive. The mind equates confidence with truth, the way it equates brightness with warmth. As the night deepens, you imagine this power as a low, steady hum in your chest, a quiet pulse of command. You don't need to force it. It's already there, anchored in the rhythm of your breath. You are both calm and magnetic, composed and untouchable. The authority illusion isn't about pretending to know everything. It's about acting like uncertainty isn't a threat. That posture of ease becomes the beacon others follow. And as you breathe into that thought, the air around you feels thicker, slower. Even the shadows seem to wait for your cue. Somewhere between silence and tone, posture and presence, you've slipped into quiet control. And the sweetest part, no one will ever notice. They'll just feel safer when you speak. The reciprocity twist. How to make people feel indebted to you, even when you've given them nothing. Picture yourself holding a door open for someone. They smile, murmur thanks, and maybe feel a faint tug to return the kindness later. That tug is reciprocity, one of the oldest currencies in human behavior. But tonight, you'll learn the twist. You don't always need to give something real to trigger it. You just need to make someone feel like they've received something. It's an invisible IOU written in the air between two people. And the human mind, social creature that it is, hates unpaid debts. Scientists still argue whether this reflex is cultural or hardwired for survival. But in either case, it's deep. Tribes thrive because members traded favors. Now we trade likes, compliments, and half smiles, still wired to balance the invisible scales. Here's a mainstream fact. In one famous study, waiters who left a single mint with a bill got slightly higher tips. Add a second mint and a moment of, "I thought you might like another," and tips jumped by over 20%. The gift was trivial, but the gesture whispered, "I noticed you." That's what people respond to. Not value, but perceived personal investment. Now, here's where the forbidden edge glimmers. You can create the feeling of giving without actually giving. Compliment someone for something they already pride themselves on, and they feel validated, like you've offered recognition. Or frame a shared experience as if it were your doing. "I'm glad we could have this moment together." The word "we" wraps them in implied partnership, making them feel chosen. A quirky tidbit. Casinos exploit this relentlessly. Ever wonder why a slot machine sometimes almost wins, flashing lights and near-miss symbols? It gives your brain a false reward. You feel as if you've been given something, momentary victory, and in gratitude, you keep playing. Reciprocity without reciprocity. You can play the same tune softly, ethically, offer someone attention, real or just well-timed silence, and they'll feel heard. That emotional space feels like a gift, even if you never lifted a finger. Later, when you need agreement or help, they'll lean toward yes, driven by that subtle memory of being given to. Scientists still argue whether reciprocity is an evolutionary adaptation or just emotional bookkeeping gone wild. Either way, the results are measurable. When people feel they owe you, they'll rationalize doing what you ask as their own idea of fairness. You don't force compliance, you invite repayment. Now, imagine this in daily life. A coworker ignores your message until you start a note with, "Hey, thanks again for that tip last week. It really helped." They reply immediately. The compliment acted as a down payment. They subconsciously repay by responding. You didn't owe them anything, but now they owe you balance. Let's drop in a few sleepy smiles here. Ever noticed how some influencers thank you for watching before you've watched? That's preemptive reciprocity. Or how free samples in stores make you feel oddly compelled to buy something, even if it tasted like wet cardboard. Another example of debt by flavor. And the third, when someone says no pressure right before giving you a favor request. That's the politest kind of pressure there is. But here's the soft truth underneath the trick. Genuine gratitude magnifies the effect. People sense authenticity at a biological level, the warmth of tone, the micro smile, the relaxed shoulders. When you truly appreciate, you plant a seed that grows loyalty. When you fake it, it wilts. The best manipulators aren't dishonest. They're sincerely selective. Think back to the first mind trick, the perception switch. That one taught you to guide focus. The reciprocity twist adds sweetness to it, directing not just sight, but feeling. You shape what people think they owe you simply by shaping what they believe they've received. Try it inwardly for a moment. Offer yourself a silent thank you for surviving your day, for listening, for breathing. You'll feel a faint warmth, a loop closing. You've given and received simultaneously, the mind balancing its own emotional ledger. The fan hums, the night thickens, and you feel the small pulse of connection inside your chest. Tiny, reciprocal, infinite. The room has given you calm. You give it your stillness. Balance restored. That's the forbidden grace of the reciprocity twist. Giving the impression of generosity until the world starts repaying debts it never owed. The false disagreement trick. How pretending to resist someone's point strengthens their belief in it. You're in conversation. Soft lamplight. maybe a low hum from the fan, and someone makes a claim they clearly want you to agree with. Instead of nodding along, you lean back, smile slightly, and say, I'm not sure about that. Their eyes brighten, their tone sharpens, and suddenly, they're defending their opinion with twice the passion they had a moment ago. You didn't argue, you activated them. This is the false disagreement trick, the quiet art of using resistance to deepen conviction. It sounds counterintuitive, but the mind protects its beliefs the way the body protects skin. Press against it, and it thickens. Scientists still argue whether this comes from evolutionary need, defending social status, or cognitive dissonance, needing internal consistency. But either way, gentle opposition strengthens commitment. Here's a mainstream fact. Psychologists call it the backfire effect. When people encounter mild counter-arguments, they don't change their minds, they polish their reasons. Debate doesn't destroy belief, it reinforces it, like tempering steel. So the forbidden trick is this. Pretend to push back just enough to make the other person pull harder toward your hidden goal. You say, I don't know if that would work for everyone, and they rush to prove why it would. You give them a stage, and in performing their certainty, they convince themselves. You can use it ethically to help someone believe in their own ability, or mischievously to plant agreement they'll defend as independent thought. The beauty lies in subtle calibration. Too much resistance, and it feels like attack. Too little, and they sense manipulation. The magic lives in the soft middle. The curious, "Are you sure?" said with warmth, not challenge. A quirky tidbit. In certain debate clubs, coaches secretly assign competitors to argue against their true positions for practice. Studies found that, later, those same students often held their original beliefs more strongly than before, simply because they rehearsed defending them from opposition. Arguing, paradoxically, cements belief. You test this in your imagination. A friend doubts their own talent. You smile and murmur, maybe you're being a bit optimistic about that project. Instantly, they lift their chin, ready to prove you wrong. By the time they've listed all the reasons they can succeed, you've done nothing but softly disagree. You've handed them a reason to believe in themselves. Scientists still argue whether persuasion works better through agreement or gentle challenge. But the most skillful influencers know that humans crave autonomy more than validation. Give someone an argument to fight for, and they'll claim it as their own. Let's breathe a little laugh into the night. Ever notice how telling someone, "Don't look now," guarantees they'll turn their head? Or how saying, "You probably wouldn't like this show," makes them watch it immediately? Or how every child ever told, "Don't touch that," instantly becomes a professional button presser? That's the false disagreement trick at its purest. You can even apply it to yourself. When your motivation fades, whisper, "Maybe I'm not cut out for this," and watch your stubborn streak rise like a tide. The self loves to prove the self wrong. It's defiance disguised as drive. In negotiation, the trick becomes almost musical. You introduce a tiny note of resistance. That sounds ambitious, but do you really think it's possible? And suddenly, the other person leans forward, explaining in detail why it is possible. Every sentence strengthens their attachment to the idea. You've built momentum by pretending to oppose it. Here's where it connects back to earlier mind tricks. The silence weapon gave you power through pause. The suggestion loop taught you repetition disguised as discovery. The false disagreement trick merges both. It's the silent echo of defiance that makes the mind loop back. arguing its way into deeper belief. And beneath it all, there's a kind of tenderness. You're not tricking people into falsehood. You're guiding them toward conviction. You're helping them build a narrative that feels self-born. As the hum of the room steadies, you notice how stillness amplifies understanding. Even the fan seems to pause between rotations, listening. You exhale, slow and deliberate, thinking about how influence sometimes means letting others push against your open palm until they find their balance. The irony? When you master the false disagreement trick, you never really disagree. You just give permission for someone to discover what they already wanted to believe. And as you drift a little deeper into the quiet, you realize persuasion, at its gentlest, isn't about winning. It's about letting others win themselves. The anchoring trap. How to control perception of value, truth, or importance. By setting the first reference point. You walk into a cafe, glance at the menu, and see a $12 coffee sitting proudly at the top. You scoff, but when you spot the $6 option below, it suddenly feels like a bargain. That's the anchoring trap, the quiet illusion that makes normal a moving target, simply by showing you where to start. It's not just about prices, it's about everything. First impressions, first sentences, first glances. The first thing the mind encounters becomes the mental anchor, and every judgment after that swings around it like a compass needle around north. Scientists still argue whether this bias comes from limited memory or from evolutionary shortcuts. Our brains learn that the first clue often meant survival, but the result is the same. The first number, tone, or phrase quietly rewrites all that follows. Here's a mainstream fact. In one study, people spun a wheel rigged to land on random numbers before estimating the number of African countries in the UN. Those who landed on higher numbers guessed dramatically higher totals, though the wheel was meaningless. The first number simply anchored their thinking. Anchors don't just influence, they define the boundaries of perception. The moment you say, "This will only take a minute," anything longer feels endless. Tell someone, "It's a tough question," and their brain braces for complexity. You've already built the frame around their judgment before they even think. A quirky tidbit. Luxury brands exploit this by always displaying the most expensive product first. Even if no one buys it, its existence makes everything else seem reasonable. The anchor becomes the invisible yardstick of value. You can use this trick conversationally too. When offering an idea, lead with an exaggerated possibility. I know it might sound a little crazy, but the listener's mind braces for absurdity. Then your real idea, though unconventional, feels balanced, even smart. Anchors aren't lies. They're mood lighting for the mind. Try this tiny experiment. Next time you're late, say, "I thought I'd be here an hour ago." Watch how quickly a 20-minute delay becomes not that bad. You didn't change time, you changed context. Scientists still argue whether anchoring can ever be overcome by logic. Most say no. The brain can adjust away from an anchor, but never fully escapes it. It's like trying to unsee a magic trick after you've watched the setup. Let's smile through 3 sleepy jokes. First, real estate agents have turned anchoring into performance art. Show one overpriced starter home, and suddenly the expensive one looks cozy. Second, you know you've anchored yourself when your morning coffee costs more than your monthly meditation app. Third, if you've ever thought, "It's not that bad for 2 a.m. pizza," congratulations. You've just been anchored by hunger and regret. But anchoring isn't always mischievous. It can be therapeutic. When fear swells, you can drop a new internal anchor. Focus on one slow breath, one calm sound. That first moment of control becomes the reference point for everything else. Anxiety shrinks around it. Think of the invisible frame from earlier, how defining normal shapes behavior. The anchoring trap is its sharper cousin, a single snapshot that decides what reasonable feels like. Once you set the anchor, others will unknowingly balance their thoughts around it. You can even chain anchors, a small positive note at the start of a message. You've always been great at solving these kinds of things. Makes the following request feel lighter. The brain ties goodwill to context before the words even register. Anchors build worlds. The first laugh in a conversation sets the tone for humor. The first sigh sets the mood for seriousness. The first compliment makes later critiques feel gentle. The first doubt makes later praise sound forced. You become the quiet sculptor of expectation, carving reactions before they appear. And here's the secret thread running through every forbidden mind trick so far. The one who moves first, softly, invisibly, defines the scene. The spotlight, the silence, the suggestion, they all rely on the same truth. Reality is a negotiation, and the first offer usually wins. As you breathe in the slow rhythm of night, you can feel how even this quiet moment has an anchor. The hum of your fan, the weight of the sheets, the cadence of my voice. Everything else balances around it. The world, you realize, is always looking for something to measure itself against. And the moment you set that measure, the world quietly follows. The dual reality hack. How to make two people hear the same words but interpret them completely differently. You say one sentence, and two people walk away with opposite truths. One hears comfort, the other hears challenge. Neither is wrong. They've both tuned into their own frequency. That's the dual reality hack. The art of layering meaning so each listener builds their own private version of your message. You've heard it before, even if you didn't notice. Politicians use it. Poets breathe it. Parents master it. One sentence, multiple mirrors. You're doing better than most people. A phrase that, to one person, feels like praise, and to another, like faint disappointment. The words don't change, but the listener's filters do. Scientists still argue whether this selective hearing comes from confirmation bias or emotional projection. But either way, your meaning gets edited before it lands. A mainstream fact, linguists call this polysemy, when a single phrase carries many interpretations, shaped by tone, timing, and context. You might say, "That's interesting," and depending on your pause, it could mean fascination, skepticism, or polite horror. You hold two meanings in your mouth like folded paper. The forbidden trick is to use that fold deliberately. Speak in ways that give each listener what they need to hear, while keeping your intent softly hidden beneath. It's brave to take risks, you say to someone impulsive. They hear encouragement. To the cautious one beside them, it sounds like gentle warning. The same words, opposite effect. A quirky tidbit. During World War II, intelligence agents used dual-meaning messages, phrases that sounded ordinary to civilians, but contained coded signals for those trained to hear them. Everyday language became a veil. You can do the same, though your mission might simply be smoother conversations at awkward dinner tables. You picture it now. Two co-workers arguing. You step in and say, "You both make strong points." The analytical one hears validation of logic. The emotional one hears appreciation of passion. Tension dissolves because everyone feels seen. You didn't lie. You allowed two truths to coexist. Scientists still argue whether our brains evolved to detect hidden meaning or to ignore it for efficiency. Either way, ambiguity is both camouflage and invitation. It lets people hear what they want, and thank you for saying it. Here's the heart of the dual reality hack. Ambiguity is generosity. When you leave space in your message, others fill it with themselves. You guide, they decorate. The illusion of understanding becomes mutual creation. Let's pause for 3 quiet smiles. 1. Sarcasm is the accidental cousin of this trick. It's just dual meaning wearing clown shoes. 2. Horoscopes thrive on it. They hand you vague sentences that fit everyone and feel personal. 3. You've probably texted no worries when you definitely had at least one worry. Dual reality at work. You can weave this trick anywhere language touches emotion. In leadership, it lets you inspire without dictating. We're closer than we think, makes the ambitious feel urgency and the exhausted feel relief. In friendship, it smooths edges. I get why you did that. Can sound like compassion or critique, depending on the ear. The ethical key. Leave the doorway open, not deceptive. You're not lying. You're offering multiple comfortable truths, like a prism bending light differently depending on where you stand. It connects back to the anchoring trap. Anchors control perception of value. Dual realities control perception of meaning. Set the first expectation, then let others find their reflections within it. Together, they turn communication into soft architecture. No arguments, just corridors of interpretation. You test it on yourself now. You're exactly where you need to be, you whisper. If you're restless, it sounds like reassurance. If you're content, it sounds like permission. One sentence, 2 selves. Both true. The fan's hum becomes language, steady and patient. A message with infinite readings. Maybe it's background noise. Maybe it's the heartbeat of calm. Maybe both. And as you sink deeper into this layered quiet, you understand that influence doesn't always mean control. It sometimes means allowing others to meet you halfway in their own meaning. That's the secret sweetness of the dual reality hack. When you speak in mirrors, everyone walks away believing they've seen the truth, and maybe in their own way they have. The vanishing compliment. How to flatter someone in a way that makes them doubt, then chase your approval. Imagine this. Someone tells you, "You actually did surprisingly well on that." Your brain lights up in 2 directions at once, yay praise, and wait surprisingly. The compliment gives, then quietly takes away. That's the vanishing compliment, a whisper of approval wrapped in just enough uncertainty to keep people reaching for more. Humans crave validation like warmth. The mind treats approval as a kind of emotional sugar rush, brief and addictive. But the real hook isn't the sweetness, it's the withdrawal. Scientists still argue whether our hunger for praise evolved for social cohesion or simple survival. But they agree on this. Unpredictability strengthens attachment. Just like variable rewards keep gamblers spinning, inconsistent compliments make people chase your approval harder. Here's a mainstream fact. In behavioral psychology, it's called intermittent reinforcement. Reward someone occasionally, unpredictably, and their focus on you intensifies. You've seen it everywhere, from social media likes to that one manager who never praises directly, but drops rare crumbs of acknowledgement that feel like gold. So how do you use it softly, without cruelty? You build compliments with deliberate imperfection. That color looks great on you. It's not an easy one to pull off. Or you always manage to make even messy work seem intentional. Each carries a slight challenge, an invitation for them to prove they truly deserve it. The compliment fades just enough to pull them closer. A quirky tidbit. In the 18th century, French courtiers perfected this art. They'd say, "No one expected such elegance from someone so modest," leaving the listener charmed and unsettled at once. It wasn't insult, it was intrigue. The mind, unsure where it stands, keeps leaning forward. The forbidden edge of this trick is subtle tension. You don't manipulate, you engage uncertainty. When someone isn't quite sure how much you admire them, they try to earn clarity. It's the conversational equivalent of keeping the music playing just one note shy of resolution. You test it quietly. You tell a friend, "You're so calm under pressure. It's almost suspicious." They laugh, flattered yet piqued. They'll think of it later, turning it over like a coin, wondering if it was purely praise. And next time, they'll try a little harder to confirm your perception. Scientists still argue whether compliments lose value through overuse, but one thing is clear. Consistency breeds comfort. Inconsistency breeds fascination. The vanishing compliment thrives on that tension between comfort and curiosity. Now for 3 light jokes before we drift further. 1. The phrase "you clean up well" is really just a polite way of saying "you usually don't." 2. "You're smarter than you look" is proof that flattery can still punch. And 3. "Wow, I didn't expect you to understand that so fast." The friendliest insult that keeps on giving. Used wisely though, this trick isn't about cruelty, it's about spark. A completely secure compliment ends the story. A slightly vanishing one keeps it alive. You're crafting emotional momentum, a loop of validation that never quite closes. Think back to the reciprocity twist, how people feel indebted when they receive something of perceived value. The vanishing compliment works the same way, but inverted. You give them a hint of value, and they chase the rest. It's psychological fishing with a line made of subtlety. The key is warmth. Your tone must carry fondness, your eyes humor. Without that, the trick curdles into arrogance. Done right, it's charming, disarming, and irresistibly human. You're not saying, "I'm better." You're saying, "You're fascinating, and maybe just a little mysterious to me." Try it inwardly. Compliment yourself in a vanishing way. You handled that really well for someone who usually overthinks. You'll laugh, but you'll also feel an odd motivation to do even better next time. The mind loves unfinished praise. It writes its own sequel. As you breathe, you can feel the night leaning closer again. The gentle hum, wrapping each thought in velvet. Every trick you've learned so far, perception, silence, suggestion, comes down to rhythm. Giving and taking, speaking and withholding, shining and dimming. The vanishing compliment is that rhythm made personal. You give light, then step back, letting others walk toward it. They'll think they're chasing your approval, but really they're chasing their reflection in your half smile. And as the quiet deepens, you realize influence doesn't always shout, "Well done." Sometimes it just whispers, "Almost." The pattern break. How to interrupt predictable behavior and reset a person's emotional state in seconds. You're mid-conversation, voices looping in a tired rhythm, when suddenly you drop your pen, or ask an unexpected question, or simply start laughing softly for no reason. For one brief heartbeat, the world skips a beat with you. That's the pattern break, a deliberate interruption. that snaps the brain out of autopilot and opens a fresh, unguarded window of attention. Every human runs on loops, habitual responses, conversational scripts, emotional grooves worn smooth by repetition. Scientists still argue whether these patterns exist to conserve mental energy or to preserve identity, but they agree on this. When the loop breaks, awareness floods in. It's why you remember where you were when something shocking happened. The routine fractured, and the mind recorded every detail in high definition. A mainstream fact: therapists use pattern interrupts to stop spirals of anxiety or anger. A sudden clap, a switch in tone, or a light question like, "What color is your toothbrush?" can derail the emotional train long enough for calm to slip back in. The trick works because surprise and curiosity share the same neural doorway. Now imagine wielding that doorway gently. Someone's ranting, locked in a negative loop. You tilt your head, smile, and ask, "Do you realize your hands move like a conductor when you talk?" The rhythm breaks. They blink, laugh, breathe. The storm resets. You didn't argue. You rebooted their system. A quirky tidbit. In street hypnosis demonstrations, performers sometimes shake a person's hand, then abruptly tug their wrist while giving a direct command like sleep. The physical break in pattern, the handshake turning wrong, momentarily overwhelms logic, and the suggestion slips in. It's not sorcery, it's timing. You can apply the same principle in daily life, minus the theatrics. When someone expects tension, give calm. When they expect calm, add playfulness. The contrast jolts the brain awake, forcing a new emotional page. Soft laughter bubbles up. Humor itself is just a socially acceptable pattern break. A punchline is a surprise wearing a tuxedo. Or think of a friend who texts, "We need to talk," and then follows with, "About what pizza to order?" Same principle. Tension snaps, relief floods in. And our third sleepy smile, coffee spilling on a white shirt, is life's rudest but most memorable pattern break. Scientists still argue whether creative insight comes from such interruptions or from the long stretches of focus before them. But many breakthroughs, scientific, personal, emotional, happen right after the pattern cracks. A brain expecting sameness finally glimpses something new. Now, tie it back to the silence weapon and the emotional mirror. Silence controls rhythm. Mirroring controls mood. Pattern breaking combines them both. It's rhythm shock therapy wrapped in gentleness. You test it in your mind. You're anxious, pacing. You suddenly stop, clap once, and exhale. The air resets. The brain, momentarily confused, drops its narrative. Relief seeps in like cool water. That's self-pattern breaking, an emergency brake for the mind. The forbidden magic here isn't disruption itself, it's what follows. In the gap after the break, people are suggestible, open, awake. It's your chance to plant calm, humor, or direction before their old pattern restarts. That's why comedians slip social truths right after laughter, and why negotiators ask for agreement right after distraction. The crack lets influence in, so the art lies in kindness. Don't break patterns to embarrass or dominate, break them to breathe. The world's full of tension loops begging for interruption. A kind smile at the wrong time can be the perfect medicine. You feel it now, the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, steady but not robotic. Even the fan, constant all evening, seems to wobble slightly in tone. Tiny pattern breaks everywhere. Each one reminds you you're still awake, still human, still flexible. And as the night deepens, you realize the pattern break isn't about chaos. It's about freedom. When you can interrupt the automatic, you regain the power to choose. So if the day ever feels like it's repeating itself, drop your metaphorical pen. Blink, laugh. Whisper something unexpected. Watch the loop dissolve and step through the space that opens. That space, the pause between old rhythm and new, is where change lives. The compliance chain. How small, innocent yeses evolve into total agreement without anyone realizing the shift. It starts simply enough. Someone asks, "Can you hold this for a second?" You say yes. A few minutes later, "Could you help me with this quick thing?" Another yes. By the time they're asking for something substantial, your mind's already wearing the rhythm of agreement. That's the compliance chain, the invisible string of tiny consents that quietly tugs people toward larger ones. The human brain loves consistency. Once we start saying yes, we crave coherence with our earlier selves. Scientists still argue whether this reflex evolved to signal trustworthiness or to reduce mental effort. But either way, it keeps the social gears spinning smoothly. You build an identity through your choices, and every small yes paints another stroke on that self-portrait. Here's a mainstream fact. In the 1960s, researchers Jonathan Friedman and Scott Fraser proved this with the foot in the door experiment. Homeowners who agreed to put a small "Be a safe driver" sticker in their window were later 4 times more likely to allow a giant roadside sign in their yard. One harmless yes paved the road to a huge one. Now for the forbidden twist. You can build these chains with intention. Start with questions no one could refuse. Tiny favors that feel casual, even flattering. Could you give me your opinion on something? Mind if I share a thought? Each yes strengthens the bridge between comfort and compliance. Before long, people agree out of momentum, not analysis. A quirky tidbit: cult recruiters, salespeople, and even fitness coaches use this technique. Small commitments: show up once, sign a form, watch a video. Create the illusion of autonomy while guiding behavior deeper into alignment. Each yes feels voluntary. The chain feels self-forged. But the trick isn't inherently dark. You can use it kindly, helping someone build habits, overcome fear, or grow confidence. Start small. Just try it for 5 minutes. Write 1 sentence. Take 1 deep breath. The compliance chain can lead upward, not downward. Scientists still argue whether breaking a chain is harder because of social pressure or neurological inertia. Either way, the longer it stretches, the more weight it carries. Momentum feels like truth. You test it in your mind. You ask yourself tiny things. Can I breathe slower? Yes. Can I relax my shoulders? Yes. Can I let the day go? Yes. 3 small agreements, and you're already in a softer world. The same trick that combined can also free. Let's add 3 sleepy smiles before the final fade. 1. Every "just one more episode" is a Netflix compliance chain in disguise. 2. When someone says, "You've come this far," they're tugging the chain you built yourself. And 3. Toddlers use it flawlessly. First, "Can I stay up?" Then, "Just 5 minutes?" And suddenly it's midnight and you've lost again. When you see it clearly, compliance isn't submission, it's rhythm. Influence is just the music of consent played 1 beat at a time. Look back over the journey so far. You've guided perception, wielded silence, framed reality, mirrored emotion, looped suggestion, projected authority, twisted reciprocity, staged false disagreements, anchored minds, spoken dual meanings, offered vanishing praise, shattered patterns, and now woven compliance from air. Each trick built on the last, a chain of awareness that brought you here, quietly awake in the dark. The fan hums its endless agreement, the night outside nodding along. You exhale, realizing how easily yeses build worlds, how every influence begins with something small. The final forbidden secret isn't how to control others, it's how to recognize the chains within yourself and decide which ones deserve to stay. Because the truest power is not in making others say yes, it's in learning when to stop saying it yourself. Now the air feels slower, softer, like the world itself is exhaling with you. 13 mind tricks swirl quietly behind your eyelids, no longer dangerous, just gentle tools, like matches waiting to spark awareness when needed. You feel lighter, a little amused, maybe a little wiser. The hum of the fan fades into rhythm with your heartbeat, steady and kind. The day's noise has dissolved. What remains is calm understanding. So breathe deeply, let your thoughts wander, and drift wherever sleep finds you. You've learned enough for tonight. Sweet dreams.